writers set out to adapt Frank Baum's story. Now preserved at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, this early draft, heavily notated by screenwriter Noel Langley, is evidence of the transformation the script went through.
Whenever they had a problem with the script, they went back to the book and solved it by seeing how L. Frank Baum had done it.
In Frank Baum's story, Dorothy's slippers are silver. In the movie, they are ruby red. And today, it's the ruby slippers and the journey they took that resonate for visitors from all over the world.
You can see people of different languages exchanging in front of the case with the ruby slippers, and perhaps they don't understand each other, but they're sharing that moment, and they're sharing that moment of memory.
The film was a turning point in cinema, in the same way that the book was in publishing in 1900. Just as Frank Baum and William Wallace Denslow used color as a storytelling device in their book, so did MGM.
There is no rainbow in Baum's book. That was, again, an MGM invention. It was E.Y. Harburg, the lyricist of the songs for The Wizard of Oz, who realized, okay, what would bring color to Dorothy's life? What would be the only thing in color that that little girl would see in that gray existence? And he thought of a rainbow.
The rainbow was an extension of the movie's visual transition from black and white in Dorothy's real world to the vivid colors of Oz, which was made possible because of a new process called Technicolor.
Since the 1890s, it had been a goal of the motion picture industry to add color to the black and white films that they were producing. And so even in the 1890s, Edison and the Lumiere brothers were undertaking processes by which they hand-colored each frame of the film, but it was very painstaking. And so later on, there were attempts to tint or tone entire sections of a film for dramatic effect, and to the time that this camera was produced in the 1930s.
This is one of the 9 cameras used in the making of MGM's Wizard of Oz. It was given to the National Museum of American History by the Technicolor Corporation.
Technicolor really did something for the Wizard of Oz, and the Wizard of Oz really did something for Technicolor.
A 35mm motion picture camera was modified to run 3 strips of black and white film at the same time. Each was shot through a different color filter: red, green, and blue. Combining them during processing produced brilliant colors. But to achieve its potential, Technicolor needed more light than ever before.
And so it required carbon arc lamps, which produced extremely intense light and could also be very expensive.
Lighting costs increased fourfold, but that wasn't the only downside of Technicolor. In The Wizard of Oz, actors were made to suffer for their art in costumes which surpassed any Hollywood had ever produced.
Making Ray Bolger look like a scarecrow met a rubberized mask that also looked like burlap on his face. No one had tried to make a fantasy this elaborate using real characters.
The costume designers and the set designers really did go a little crazy in producing the most vibrant and vivid colors they could in order to take full advantage of the process.
And as I move this over the shoe, you can see in an area like this that there's like a netting underneath the sequins, and it was just a normal shoe, and they put the netting over it to allow them to stitch the sequins into the piece.
Everything they did in Wizard of Oz had to be tested. There was a huge problem getting the yellow brick road to photograph yellow. They tried this kind of tinting and that kind of dye and that kind of lighting effect, and then somebody said, why don't you just get a bucket of yellow paint and use that? And there was the yellow brick road.
Frank Baum mixed science with magic in his stories. MGM did the same to create a defining moment in the film: the extreme weather event that he once wrote about when he lived in South Dakota.
The special effects, again, what a challenge. No computers, just what they could create out of the imagination of all these amazing artisans. They used a lot of dust, a lot of wind machines, a 35-foot-long muslin stocking from the top of a soundstage to a little car underneath so that the bottom of the tornado could move around the ground. And that is how they created a very, very realistic tornado.
The magic of Hollywood recreated Frank Baum's landscapes, but it was the cast that brought them to life.
The actors seem to be in on the illusion that they are creating. So therefore, they're not playing it just for the face value of the character, they're bringing their own persona to the roles.
The actors were well matched to the roles they portrayed. They brought with them the experience of vaudeville, a uniquely American musical and comedy tradition.
I love The Cowardly Lion. And I don't know how much it's the writing of the screenplay and how much of it is the work of Burt Lahr. But that's another instance where it's the perfect mating of performer and role.
The lion, the royal lion who's afraid, incorporated all his early vaudeville business, the dancing, the, put him up, that's all from his cop act in vaudeville. The fighting and all that you see in the film, that's all stuff he did years before, but all mannerisms fed into that role.
In 1939, the movie's underlying message would be embraced by people around the world.
So you have all that energy focused on telling a story to people who for over a decade, or just about a decade, had seen the collapse of capitalism, the collapse of most of their dreams, the change of what they thought was going to be the trajectory of their lives. Behind all that was the thunder of things happening in Europe and perhaps the possibility of going to war.
We'd been through one world war, we were getting ready to go into another one. The world had changed a lot. So I think the question of sort of where's home base? Where are we? How do we get back to what's important to us? How do we discover who we are? And that story marks that journey.
3 weeks after the film's release, war was declared in Europe. And in 1941, America entered the war, as did the music from The Wizard of Oz.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a...
I don't think anybody realized at the time that Over the Rainbow would be the success that it was. I think Judy knew it was a beautiful song, but it wasn't until World War II when she started going around to sing to the troops, and she found that her most requested song was Over the Rainbow.
And as the world went to war, Over the Rainbow became a perfect fit with the times and gave many hope for the future, while another memorable song, We're Off to See the Wizard, would rally the troops.
Winston Churchill mentions in his memoirs that The Wizard of Oz was so popular in Australia that the troops went into combat singing the song from Wizard of Oz as they went into battle.
Little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow. Why, oh, why can't I?
Frank Baum set out to write the first genuine American fairy tale to give pleasure to children. Today, wherever people gather to read his books, to see the movie, or visit places where fragments of American memory are preserved, Frank Baum and his wonderful Wizard of Oz will be remembered for showing others the way back home.
It's quite an honor. I feel quite honored to be in this family in this way at this time. And quite fantastic that 100 years later, 110 years later, it's still quite popular and dynamic, and people are really touched by it. It's amazing.